You know that moment when your entire world shifts? For me, it wasn't when the doctor said cancer. It wasn't even when I saw the first medical bill with more zeros than I could process. It was the Tuesday evening I sat alone in my hospital room, watching the door that no one walked through, holding a phone that didn't ring, finally understanding that the family I'd spent my life supporting had decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. I'm Rebecca. For 15 years, I built a business, while my siblings built excuses. I never thought the people who shared Sunday dinners at my table would vanish when I needed more than just their company. But sometimes the harshest truths arrive when you're at your weakest, and you discover exactly who people are when being there for you requires actual sacrifice. Some people measure family by blood relations or shared memories. I now measure mine by who held my hand during chemo and who couldn't be bothered to send a text. I measure it by who helped carry the weight when my body was too weak and who only reached out when they wanted something from me. Before we jump in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the day I signed the lease on my first real office space in Denver. It was raining, the kind of spring downpour that makes the city smell clean and new. The space was nothing special, 1 and 200 square feet with industrial carpet and walls that needed painting, but it was mine. After 5 years of running my financial consulting firm from my dining room table, this felt like arriving. Are you sure about this much overhead? My brother Daniel had asked when I showed him the space, his eyes calculating rent versus my current client list. Always the practical one, my older brother, never seeing possibilities, only liabilities. I'm sure, I'd said, running my hand along the wall where I planned to hang my newly minted business credentials. We've grown 30% each year. It's time. He'd shrugged. That particular lift of his shoulders I'd grown up watching whenever he thought I was making a mistake but didn't want to argue. I'd seen that shrug when I invested my savings in my education instead of buying a house, when I started my business instead of taking the corporate job he'd found for me, when I chose to remain single into my 30s while focusing on my career. I'd proven him wrong every time, though he never quite acknowledged it. By my 40th birthday, Mountain View Financial Advisors employed 18 people. We managed over $80 million in assets for clients, had offices in 3 cities, and I'd been featured in Forbes as one of the top women in wealth management. The girl from a middle-class Aurora neighborhood who put herself through college had built something substantial, something that would last. That birthday dinner remains vivid in my memory, not because it marked a milestone, but because it was the last time my family gathered around me in celebration before everything changed. We'd reserved a private room at Cattivo, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown that had become my personal tradition for marking achievements. My parents, Richard and Margaret, both retired teachers, beamed with quiet pride. Daniel brought his wife, Elaine, and their teenagers, Sophie and Jason. My younger sister, Vanessa, arrived late as usual, full of stories about her latest theater production. Even my Aunt Diane drove in from Colorado Springs. The private dining room hummed with conversation and laughter. To Rebecca, my father had toasted, raising his glass of Cabernet, who keeps showing us what determination looks like. I remember feeling fully seen in that moment, validated after years of working tirelessly. In hindsight, I should have paid more attention to the subtle undercurrents, how Daniel immediately steered the conversation to Sophie's college applications, how Vanessa mentioned her car trouble 3 separate times, how my mother asked when I might slow down and focus on a personal life. But I was happy, surrounded by family, successful by any measure. I couldn't have known that within 6 months I'd be questioning everything about these relationships that I thought were unconditional. Winter arrived early that year. By late October, the mountains were already snow-capped, and Denver had that crystalline quality to the air that always made me feel more alive. I'd just finished a morning meeting with a major potential client when the dizziness hit. Sudden, disorienting. accompanied by a stabbing pain on the right side of my abdomen. My assistant Jessica found me leaning against the wall outside the conference room, trying to catch my breath. "Ms. Collins, are you all right?" Her voice seemed to come from a distance. "Just need a minute," I managed to say, though the pain was intensifying rather than subsiding. "Could you reschedule my lunch meeting?" She did more than that. When the color drained from my face and I couldn't stand upright any longer, she called 911, then rode with me in the ambulance to University Hospital. I remember protesting weakly as they loaded me onto the stretcher, still clutching my portfolio as if the quarterly projections inside were more urgent than whatever was happening to my body. "Should I call someone?" Jessica asked as we waited in the emergency room, her young face pinched with worry. "Family? A friend?" "Call Daniel," I said, giving her his number. "And could you let Marcos know he needs to take the Gilbert meeting tomorrow if I'm not back?" Marcos was my second in command, capable and trustworthy, but the Gilbert account was worth potentially millions in management fees. Even through waves of pain, my mind fixated on not losing the opportunity we'd spent months cultivating. Jessica nodded and stepped away to make the calls. I closed my eyes, focusing on breathing through the pain that now radiated through my entire right side. I've always had a high tolerance for discomfort. A childhood of competitive swimming had taught me to push through physical limitations, but this was different. This was my body sounding an alarm I couldn't ignore. The ER doctor ordered blood, tests, and a CT scan. The nurses moved efficiently around me, inserting an IV, administering pain medication that dulled the sharpest edges but couldn't eliminate the persistent ache. I kept checking my phone. No messages from Daniel. 2 hours passed, then 3. "Your brother is on his way," Jessica assured me when she returned from getting coffee. "He said he needed to finish something at work first." I nodded, unsurprised. Daniel was a senior partner at a downtown law firm. Billable hours always came first, a dedication to work I understood better than most. The doctor returned as evening, settled over the city, the windows of my ER bay reflecting the fluorescent lights rather than showing the darkening sky. "Ms. Collins, the CT shows a mass on your liver," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "About 7 centimeters. We'll need to do a biopsy to determine exactly what we're dealing with, but given the blood work, we're concerned it may be malignant." The word hung in the sterile air between us. Malignant. Even through the haze of pain medication, I understood what he wasn't explicitly saying. Cancer. At 40. When I was finally at the peak of my career, financially secure, ready to enjoy the fruits of years of sacrifice and hard work. "How soon can we do the biopsy?" I asked, slipping automatically into problem-solving mode, the same approach I used with challenging client portfolios. Identify the issue, gather data, develop an action plan. "We'd like to admit you and do it tomorrow morning," he replied. "The mass is in a concerning location, and your pain levels indicate we shouldn't wait." I nodded, already mentally cataloging what I'd need from my condo, which meetings would need to be rescheduled, whether my laptop charger was in my bag or still at the office. "Is there someone who can bring you some personal items? Family member? Partner?" the doctor asked. "My brother is coming," I said, checking my phone again. Still nothing from Daniel. Jessica had left reluctantly an hour ago, promising to return in the morning with anything I needed from the office. "I'll have the nurse help you get settled upstairs once a room is ready," the doctor said, making a final note in my chart before moving on to his next patient. Left alone in the curtained bay, I finally allowed myself a moment of fear. Not about death, strangely that wasn't my first concern, but about time, about the possibility of losing momentum in the business I'd built, about clients seeking other advisors if I was sidelined for treatment, about my carefully constructed life unraveling if I couldn't maintain the pace that had defined me for so long. I texted Daniel again. "Being admitted. Mass on liver. Biopsy tomorrow. Could you bring my toiletries kit and some clothes? The three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, sorry, just leaving office. What? They're moving me soon. We'll update. When I was finally wheeled to a private room on the oncology floor, a word that made my stomach clench despite my determination to remain pragmatic, it was past 9 p.m. The night nurse helped me settle in, explained the call button and the schedule for vitals checks, and left me alone in the suddenly too quiet room. I stared at my phone. Nothing from Daniel. Nothing from my parents, who were probably already asleep. They rarely stayed up past 8:30 these days. Nothing from Vanessa, who was likely in rehearsal or at a cast gathering afterward. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt completely alone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not the productive solitude I often sought, but a hollowness that echoed with the beeping of medical equipment and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. At 10:37 p.m., my phone finally chimed. Daniel. Sorry. Sophie had a meltdown. About her English paper. We'll come by tomorrow after court. Elaine sends her thoughts. I read the message twice, something cold settling in my chest that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. My brother lived 20 minutes from the hospital. His daughter's English paper took precedence over his sister's cancer scare. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before simply sending, okay. That night, drifting in and out of medicated sleep in a strange bed with sheets that smelled of industrial bleach, I had the first inkling that the people I had always believed would drop everything for me, just as I had consistently done for them, might not be capable of the same level of commitment. It was just a missed hospital visit, I reasoned in the gray hours before dawn. Daniel had court in the morning. He'd come afterward. My parents didn't even know yet. I'd wait to call them until after the biopsy, when I had actual information to share rather than just scary possibilities. Vanessa was, well, Vanessa. Perpetually self-absorbed but loving in her scattered way. They would all show up when it really mattered. I was sure of it. The biopsy took place early the next morning. The procedure itself was quick but uncomfortable, even with local anesthesia. I focused on my breathing the way I did during difficult client meetings, counting inhales and exhales, staying present rather than catastrophizing about potential outcomes. Jessica arrived shortly after I returned to my room, bringing my laptop, charger, and a small overnight bag she'd packed after using the spare key I kept in my office for emergencies. The team sends their best, she said, setting up my devices on the adjustable table. Marcos has the Gilbert meeting handled, and I've rescheduled everything else through Friday. Martha said not to worry about her retirement projections. It can wait until next week. I felt a rush of gratitude for my efficient, thoughtful assistant, who had essentially done exactly what family should do, anticipated needs, solved problems, and offered support without being asked. Thank you, Jessica. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled, adjusting the flowers she'd brought, a simple arrangement of sunflowers that brightened the clinical space. It's nothing. We all just want you well. I checked my phone. Still nothing from Daniel, despite his promise to come after court. It was nearly 2 p.m. Have you told your family? Do they need the room number? Jessica asked, following my glance at the silent phone. My brother knows I'm here. I'll call. My parents once I have the results, I said, not wanting to admit that Daniel hadn't shown up as promised. Jessica nodded, not pushing further. I can stay if you want company. Part of me wanted to say yes, to not be alone with the uncertainty and the growing sense of abandonment. But Jessica had a job to do, and I had never been one to show vulnerability, especially not to employees. No need. I have plenty to catch up on, I said, gesturing to the laptop. But thank you. After Jessica left, I tried to focus on work emails, but the words blurred together. The pain medication made concentration difficult, and the weight of what was happening kept intruding on my attempts at normalcy. I called Daniel, the call going straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Just wondering what time you might stop by." The doctor should have preliminary results later today. Then I called my parents, deciding they should know what was happening regardless of having complete information. My mother answered on the fourth ring. "Rebecca, is everything all right? You never called during the day." I explained the situation as straightforwardly as possible, minimizing the fear that had been building since the doctor first mentioned the ass. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice tightening. "That's frightening. Do they think it's serious? They won't know until the biopsy results come back, but they're concerned." A pause. "Are you alone? Has Daniel been to see you?" "Not yet. He had court this morning." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father and I would come right away, but you know his back has been giving him trouble, and the drive to Denver." "It's fine, Mom, really. I just wanted you to know what's happening." "Of course. Keep us updated. We're praying for you." We hung up a few minutes later, after she asked if I had enough sick leave at work and reminded me to stay hydrated. Not once did she suggest coming to the hospital, taking a taxi or asking a neighbor to drive them, or even seeing if Vanessa could pick them up. My parents lived in Aurora, less than an hour from the hospital. By evening, when the oncologist came to discuss the preliminary biopsy results, I sat alone in my hospital room, the golden light of sunset casting long shadows across the floor. "I'm afraid the initial results confirm our concerns," Dr. Patel said gently. "The mass appears to be a primary liver cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma. Unusual in someone your age without underlying liver disease, which is why we want to run additional tests to understand the full picture." I nodded, processing the confirmation of my worst fears with the same analytical approach I applied to market downturns. "What's the treatment protocol? Timeline?" Dr. Patel seemed slightly surprised by my businesslike response, but continued professionally. "That depends on several factors. The staging, whether it has spread, your overall health. We'll need an MRI and additional blood work. Given the size of the tumor and your symptoms, I'd like to start treatment as soon as possible. Typically, this would involve a combination of approaches, possibly surgery, perhaps targeted therapy, or immunotherapy." "And success rates?" I asked, the financial advisor in me automatically calculating risk assessments. Her expression softened. "Every case is different, Ms. Collins. With aggressive treatment, many patients respond well. Your otherwise excellent health is a significant advantage." We discussed next steps, tests scheduled for the following day, a treatment planning session once all results were in, potential consultations with specialists. "Do you have someone who can help you through this process?" Dr. Patel asked before leaving. Cancer treatment is as much an emotional journey as a physical one. Support systems make a tremendous difference in outcomes. "Yes," I said automatically, the lie sticking slightly in my throat. "My family is very supportive." After she left, I sat in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights as the final glow of sunset faded from my window. My phone showed a text from Daniel sent an hour earlier. "Got caught up with a client emergency. We'll try for tomorrow. How are you feeling?" I set the phone down without responding, a strange numbness spreading through me that had nothing to do with medication. Cancer. I had cancer. And in the moment I learned this life-altering news, I was completely alone. Not because I had no one. I had parents, a brother, a sister, extended family, friends, colleagues, but because none of them had made me a priority. None of them had shown up. The realization settled over me like the darkness now filling my hospital room. Quiet, but absolute. I finally turned on the lamp beside my bed and opened my laptop. If I couldn't count on family for support, I would need to approach this like any other challenge in my life, with meticulous planning, sufficient resources, and professional assistance. I created a new spreadsheet titled Cancer Management, with tabs for medical information, treatment schedules, work contingencies, and financial planning. The financial tab gave me pause. My insurance was excellent, one of the benefits of owning my own firm, but even the best coverage had limits, especially for cutting-edge treatments. I'd built substantial savings and investments over the years, living well below my means despite my success. I could weather significant medical expenses if necessary. But the question that kept returning as I worked through the night, organizing my approach to fighting cancer with the same determination I'd applied to building my business, was why I should have to face this alone. Why the family I'd supported emotionally and financially for years couldn't offer me the same in return. Daniel's law school tuition supplements when his scholarships fell short. Vanessa's rent when she chose unpaid theater internships over steady employment. My parents' roof replacement last year. The down payment assistance for Daniel and Elaine's house. The countless dinners, vacations, and gifts I'd provided without hesitation, because that's what family does, or what I thought family did, until I found myself alone in a hospital room, facing the fight of my life, creating spreadsheets to manage my own care because there was no one else stepping up to help. By morning, when the nurse came in to check my vitals, I had developed not just a cancer management plan, but the first seedlings of a recognition that would eventually grow into the decision to rewrite my will, not out of spite or revenge, but out of a clear-eyed reassessment of who had earned a claim to the legacy I'd built. But that revelation was still developing, still taking root in the fertile ground of disappointment. For now, I focused on the immediate next steps: additional tests, treatment options, work arrangements. I would fight this cancer with every resource at my disposal. And I would pay very close attention to who fought alongside me. The biopsy procedure itself was mercifully quick, though the hours of waiting afterward stretched endlessly. I lay in my hospital bed answering emails, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy despite the gravity of my situation. The oncology ward had a particular stillness to it, a hushed quality that seemed to amplify my isolation rather than provide peace. By mid-afternoon, I'd received no word from Daniel. No messages from my parents after our brief call. Nothing from Vanessa, who still didn't know what was happening. I stared at my phone, debating whether to reach out again, when a knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. "Rebecca Collins?" A woman stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, wearing a navy blazer over practical slacks. "Yes?" I set my laptop aside, wondering if she was from the hospital administration. She stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Caroline Winters, patient advocate with the hospital's financial services department. Do you have a few minutes to discuss your treatment plan and associated costs?" I nodded, gesturing to the chair beside my bed. My businesswoman's instincts kicked in automatically. Whenever money entered a conversation, it was best to be fully alert. Caroline sat down, arranging her paperwork with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Patel has ordered a comprehensive treatment plan, which will need to begin as soon as possible. I wanted to review what portions will be covered by your insurance and what you might be responsible for." She handed me a preliminary estimate that made my stomach clench. Even with my excellent coverage, the out-of-pocket expenses were staggering, nearly $120,000 for the initial treatment phase alone, with potential for more depending on how I responded. "This seems excessive," I said carefully, scanning the itemized list. Caroline nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, several of the recommended treatments are classified as experimental by many insurance companies. Dr. Patel believes they offer the best chance for your particular case, but they're not fully covered." I took a deep breath, my mind already calculating liquidity options. I had savings, of course, and investments I could liquidate if necessary. The business was profitable, though much of that profit was being reinvested for expansion. "We have several payment plans available," Caroline continued, outlining options that would allow me to spread the cost over months or years. "And there are assistance programs for which you might qualify." I almost laughed at that. On paper, I was far too wealthy for financial assistance. My success, which I'd worked so hard to achieve, now disqualified me from help while simultaneously making me a target for astronomical medical charges. "I'll handle it," I said finally, taking the papers from her. "Please proceed with whatever Dr. Patel recommends." Caroline seemed slightly surprised by my lack of negotiation, but nodded. "Of course. I'll leave these with you to review. We'll need your signature before treatment begins tomorrow." After she left, I stared at the figures again, the reality of what I was facing finally sinking in. This wasn't just a health crisis, it was a financial one as well. For the first time, I considered reaching out to my family not just for emotional support, but for practical assistance. My parents had modest savings. Their teachers' pensions covered their basic needs, but they weren't wealthy by any means. Still, they owned their home outright, had no significant debt, and had always preached the importance of helping family in times of need. Daniel was different. His law practice was lucrative, and Elaine came from money. They lived in Cherry Creek, drove matching luxury SUVs, and sent their children to private school. They could help if they wanted to. Vanessa was perpetually broke, her theater passion never translating to financial stability, but even token assistance would demonstrate her commitment. I picked up my phone, hesitated, then set it down again. I couldn't bring myself to ask. Not yet. Not when they hadn't even bothered to check on me after my diagnosis. Instead, I called Jessica. "Could you bring my financial portfolio files when you come tomorrow? The personal ones, not client records." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "Is everything okay?" "Just planning ahead," I said, unwilling to burden my assistant with my financial concerns. "And Jessica? Thank you for everything. I don't say it enough." "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "We're all here for you." That simple statement, "we're all here for you," contrasted so sharply with my family's absence that I had to end the call quickly before emotion overtook me. That evening, Dr. Patel returned with the biopsy results. The news wasn't good. Stage 3, hepatocellular carcinoma. Aggressive, requiring immediate intervention. She outlined a treatment plan. Surgery first, followed by targeted therapy, possibly immunotherapy, and close monitoring. "We'll need to begin tomorrow," she said, her expression grave but determined. "Time is a factor here." I nodded, signing the consent forms with a steady hand that belied my inner turmoil. When she asked if I had questions, I had only one. "How long will recovery take? When can I return to work?" She gave me a look I was beginning to recognize, the one medical professionals reserve for patients who don't quite grasp the severity of their situation. "Rebecca, this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Full recovery, if all goes well, will take months. You need to prepare for that reality." Months. Months away from my business, from the life I'd built, from the control I'd always maintained. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. Not yet." After Dr. Patel left, I finally called Daniel again. This time, he answered. "Hey, Beck. Sorry I couldn't make it today. Court ran late, then I had a client emergency." "I have the results," I said, bypassing his excuses. "It's cancer. Stage 3. Surgery tomorrow." A pause. "Jesus, Beck. I'm sorry." "I need someone to be here," I said, the words difficult to form. I never asked for help, had built my life around being the helper rather than the helped. "Early. Surgery's scheduled for 8. Another pause. "Tomorrow? I don't know if I can. I have depositions all morning." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Daniel, this is cancer. Stage 3. Major surgery. I know. Let me see what I can do. Maybe Elaine can come if I can't get away. Maybe Elaine, his wife, not him. And not a promise, just a maybe. Don't worry about it, I said, my voice cooling to the professional tone I used with difficult clients. I'll be fine. Come on, don't be like that. I'm trying here. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like you're trying at all. That's not fair. I have obligations, commitments. To everyone but me, apparently. He sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. Look, I'll call Mom and Dad. They can come. They're retired. They have the time. I already called them. They said the drive is too difficult. Another silence. I'll figure it out, I said finally. Forget I asked. Beck. I hung up, something I never did, something that went against every principle of professionalism I'd lived by. But this wasn't business. This was life and death, and my brother had just made it abundantly clear where I ranked in his priorities. I sat in the darkening hospital room, the reality of my situation settling over me like a physical weight. I had built my life around being strong, independent, the one others could rely on. Now, when I needed someone to rely on, there was no one. No, that wasn't entirely true. There was Jessica, who had done more for me in the past 24 hours than my entire family. There was my team at work, who were handling clients and operations without complaint. There were colleagues and friends who would step up if I reached out, but not my family. Not the people who shared my blood, who had benefited from my success, who claimed to love me. Morning arrived with no further messages from Daniel, no calls from my parents. I prepared for surgery alone, answering the nurses' questions, signing the final forms, trying not to think about waking up with no one waiting. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I caught sight of a familiar figure hurrying down the hallway. Jessica, arriving an hour before her workday should have started, clutching a small gift bag and looking determined. "Wait," she called to the orderlies. They paused, allowing her to catch up. "I brought this," she said, handing me the bag. Inside was a small, smooth stone with the word strength engraved on it. It's silly, but my mom gave me one before my appendectomy last year. Said it helped to have something to hold on to. I closed my fingers around the stone, unexpectedly moved by the simple gesture. "I'll be here when you wake up," Jessica added. "The team said to tell you not to worry about anything. Marcos has it all under control." I nodded, unable to speak, past the sudden tightness in my throat. "Ms. Collins, we need to proceed," the nurse said gently. Jessica stepped back, giving me an encouraging smile. "See you soon, boss." As they wheeled me away, the stone warm in my palm, a thought crystallized with surprising clarity. Family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up when showing up matters most. The surgery lasted over 6 hours. I don't remember much of that day beyond fragments. The cold operating room, the anesthesiologist's kind eyes above his mask, the disorienting confusion of waking and recovery, the grinding pain that medication only partially dulled. True to her word, Jessica was there when I fully regained consciousness in my room. She sat quietly working on her laptop, looking up immediately when she noticed my eyes open. "Hey," she said softly. "Doctor says it went well. They got all of the primary tumor." I nodded, my throat too dry for speech. She helped me with a small ice chip, then checked her watch. "Your sister called the office. I told her you were in surgery. She said she'll try to visit tomorrow." Try. Another non-commitment. "Your parents called too. I updated them." "Daniel?" My voice was a rasp. Jessica hesitated. "No, I haven't heard from him." I closed my eyes, unsurprised, yet still somehow disappointed. The days that followed established a pattern. Jessica came every morning before work and often returned in the evening. Various team members visited, bringing flowers, books, genuine concern. My neighbor Ellen, whom I barely knew, beyond occasional hallway greetings, offered to collect my mail and water my plants. Vanessa did visit once, bringing a dramatic flair to the hospital room, filling the space with stories about her latest audition, staying exactly 45 minutes before rushing off to rehearsal. She didn't ask about my treatment plan, my prognosis, or how she could help. My parents called daily but maintained their position that traveling to Denver was too difficult. They suggested I come stay with them after my release. A well-intentioned but impractical offer given their inability to provide the care I would need and their home's lack of accessibility features. Daniel was conspicuously absent, both physically and in communication. One brief text on the day after surgery, "Hope you're recovering well," swamped with the Mendelssohn case, and then nothing for 3 days. On my 5th day post-surgery, Caroline returned with more paperwork. The surgery had been more complex than anticipated, requiring specialized procedures that increased the cost substantially. The new total for my initial treatment phase, $187,000, with only about $42,000 covered by insurance. "We'll need to discuss payment arrangements," she said, her tone professional but sympathetic. "The hospital requires at least a partial payment before discharge, which is tentatively scheduled for tomorrow." I stared at the figures, mental calculations running automatically. I could liquidate my emergency fund completely. I'd need to sell some investments at a loss. The beach house in San Diego that I'd purchased as a retirement investment might need to go on the market. "I can transfer $50,000 today," I said finally. "The remainder will take some time to arrange." Caroline nodded. "That would be acceptable for discharge purposes. For the balance, we can set up a payment plan, though there will be interest charges." After she left, I pulled out my laptop, ignoring the pulling sensation of my surgical incisions, and began rearranging my financial life. Emails to my financial advisor, instructions for liquidating certain accounts, inquiries about the current market value of my vacation property. Each transaction represented years of careful saving and investment, now being dismantled to pay for the chance to survive. I was deep in spreadsheets when Daniel finally appeared in my doorway, 2 tall coffees in hand as if he were just dropping by my office for a casual chat. "You look better than I expected," he said, setting one of the coffees on my tray table. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cut out a chunk of my liver," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "What brings you by after 6 days?" He winced at my tone, but settled into the visitor's chair. "I deserved that. Things have been crazy, but that's no excuse. I should have been here." I finally looked at him directly. My brother, 5 years my senior, had always been the golden child in our family. Handsome, charismatic, seemingly effortless in his achievements while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Now he looked uncomfortable, out of place, in the sterile hospital environment. "Yes, you should have," I agreed, closing my laptop. "But that's not why you're here now. What's going on, Daniel?" He shifted, avoiding my gaze. "Can't I just be checking on my sister?" After 6 days of silence? "No, something's prompted this visit." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily softened my anger. "Mom called. Said you're being discharged tomorrow. Wanted to know if you had someone to help at home. And she asked you to check." "Well, yes." I waited. "So, do you have someone to help?" "I've arranged a home health aide," I said. "Professional care, which is what I need right now." He nodded, relief evident in his posture. He'd been worried I might ask him, or worse, suggest staying with him and Elaine. "That's good. Smart thinking." He glanced around the room, noting the flowers, cards, small gifts that had accumulated. "Looks like you have plenty of support." "Yes," I said simply, "just not from family." He flinched. That's not fair, Beck. We all have our own lives, responsibilities. Stop, I interrupted. Just stop. Do you have any idea what this week has been like? What I'm facing medically, financially, emotionally? Have you even asked? I'm asking now. Now isn't when I needed you. I needed you 6 days ago when they wheeled me into surgery, not knowing if I'd wake up with a chance to live or a death sentence. I needed you when I got the bills that are forcing me to dismantle everything I've worked for. I needed you when I was lying here alone night after night, scared in a way I've never been before. My voice remained level, controlled. The same tone I used in board meetings when making critical points. But Daniel recoiled as if I'd shouted. I'm sorry, he said, and for once he seemed to mean it. I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, I corrected. There's a difference. You've always taken my strength for granted, assumed I'd be fine because I'm always fine. But this isn't a business challenge or a temporary setback. This is cancer, Daniel. Stage 3, cancer that could kill me. He paled, perhaps truly confronting my mortality for the first time. What can I do? Tell me how to help now. I almost laughed at the question. Now he wanted to help? Now that the hardest part was over, now that helping would require minimal disruption to his comfortable life? You want to help? The bill for this adventure so far is close to $200,000. Insurance is covering less than a quarter of that. I'm looking at months of treatment, possibly more surgery, and I'll be working at reduced capacity, if at all. So unless you're offering financial assistance, there's not much you can do at this point. I hadn't actually meant it as a request, more as an illustration of what I was facing alone. But Daniel's expression shifted subtly, discomfort replacing concern. Beck, you know I would if I could, but with Sophie starting college next year, and Jason's school tuition... Stop, I said again, raising a hand. I'm not asking for your money, Daniel. I'm explaining why your offer of help now rings hollow. I figured it out, just like I always do. Just like I did when you needed help, with your law school loans, or when Vanessa couldn't make rent, or when Mom and Dad's roof collapsed. He had the grace to look ashamed. That was different. Yes, it was. Because when you all needed financial help, I gave it without hesitation or excuses. I didn't calculate the impact on my life or weigh your needs against my vacation plans. I just helped, because that's what family does. I paused, the truth of what I was about to say settling into my bones. Or at least, that's what I thought family did. I've learned otherwise this week. Daniel stood abruptly. I should go. You need rest and I have a meeting. Of course he did. Always a meeting. A case. An obligation more important than his. Sister. Goodbye, Daniel, I said, turning back to my laptop. He hesitated in the doorway. I'll call tomorrow, see how the discharge goes. I didn't respond, and after a moment, he left. We both knew he wouldn't call. The pattern was too firmly established now to be broken by empty promises. The next morning, as Jessica helped gather my things for discharge, I made a decision. It wasn't emotional or impulsive, quite the opposite. It was a clear-eyed assessment of evidence, the kind of analysis I performed for clients daily. Jessica, could you add something to my schedule for next week? I need an appointment with Lowell Greenfield. She looked up from folding my robe. You're a state attorney? Yes, it's time for some updates. She nodded, making a note without questioning further. Another reason I valued her, she understood when matters were private. The discharge process was tediously slow, involving multiple signatures, prescriptions, follow-up appointments, and care instructions. By the time I was finally seated in Jessica's car for the ride home, exhaustion had settled into my bones, making the surgical pain seem almost secondary. I've stocked your refrigerator, Jessica said as she drove carefully through midday traffic. And the home health service will start this evening. The nurse will come daily for the first week, then every other day after that. Thank you. I said, watching the familiar city streets pass by, everything looking slightly different after my hospital stay, as if the world had subtly rearranged itself while I was away. I've also rescheduled your critical meetings for video calls you can take from home, and Marcos has agreed to handle client visits for the next month at least. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the thoughtful competence of my team, the stark contrast between their support and my family's absence. You've thought of everything. Just doing my job, Jessica replied, though we both knew this level of personal assistance went far beyond her professional obligations. When we arrived at my condo building, the doorman rushed to help, concern evident in his expression. Ms. Collins, good to have you back. Can I help with anything? Thank you, Edward. I'm moving a bit slowly, but Jessica has it handled. He nodded, holding the elevator for us, then accompanying us to my door to carry the small hospital bag. These small kindnesses from people who owed me nothing except professional courtesy further highlighted what was missing from those who supposedly loved me. My condo, normally a haven of orderly sophistication, had been transformed. A hospital. Bed had been set up in the living room near the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Denver skyline. The kitchen counters held neatly arranged medication bottles, each labeled with dosage instructions. Fresh flowers brightened the dining table, and a stack of books sat beside a new, more accessible chair. The team took up a collection, Jessica explained, noticing my surprise. Everyone wanted to help make things comfortable for your recovery. I stood in the center of my transformed home, surrounded by evidence of care from people who had no obligation beyond professional respect, and felt something shift inside me, a final piece falling into place in the decision I'd been contemplating. I need to rest, I said, suddenly overwhelmed by more than physical fatigue. But first, confirm that appointment with Lowell for Monday. Tell him it's urgent. Jessica nodded, helping me settle into the adjustable hospital bed. Will you be okay alone until the nurse arrives at 6? I'll be fine, I assured her, though the thought of solitude after days in the busy hospital was both welcome and slightly daunting. You've done more than enough. After she left, I lay in the quiet apartment, watching the afternoon light play across the mountains visible from my windows. The decision I'd made felt neither vindictive nor emotional. It felt right, a correction of a long-standing imbalance, an acknowledgement of a truth I'd been avoiding for years. My family saw me as a resource, not as a person with needs of their own. They took my support for granted, expected it without reciprocation, and disappeared when giving became inconvenient. This wasn't a single failure during a crisis. It was the culmination of a lifetime pattern I'd enabled through my own unwillingness to set boundaries. This revelation didn't fill me with anger as it might have days ago. Instead, I felt an odd sense of peace, of clarity. I knew exactly what needed to be done, and for once, I would prioritize my own needs above others' expectations. Do you mind? Health nurse arrived precisely at 6. A competent woman named Marion who efficiently checked my incisions, administered medications, and helped me with the awkward process of showering with surgical wounds. Professional care, paid for rather than obligated by familial duty, yet delivered with more genuine concern than my own brother had shown. You have my number, Marion said as she prepared to leave. Call anytime, day or night, if you need anything. I'm only 15 minutes away. I thanked her, struck again by the irony that this woman, a stranger until today, was offering more reliable support than my family who lived equally close. After she left, I received the obligatory check-in calls, my mother full of questions about when I might feel well enough to visit them rather than offers to come to me. Vanessa, rushing through the conversation before heading to a cast party. A text from Daniel saying he was tied up with a case but would try to stop by on the weekend. I responded politely but briefly to each, making no requests, expressing no disappointment. The time for expecting what would never be freely given had passed. Instead, I spent the evening reviewing my finances, creating a comprehensive spreadsheet of assets, investments, and obligations. My net worth, even after the initial medical payments, remained substantial, the result of 15 years of disciplined saving and shrewd investing, alongside the growth of my business. The beach house in San Diego, purchased 5 years ago, as both vacation property and investment, had appreciated significantly. My primary residence in Denver's desirable downtown district represented another substantial asset. My business, valued conservatively at $7 million in the last assessment, was wholly owned by me with no outstanding loans against it. Investment accounts, retirement funds, and liquid savings completed the picture of financial health that would now be tested by my illness. The medical bills would consume a significant portion of my liquid assets, but my overall financial position remained strong, a fact that only served to highlight my family's unwillingness to help when they certainly could have eased the burden. By midnight, I had compiled a complete inventory of my estate, the document I would take to Lowell on Monday to guide the revisions to my will. The estate that had previously been divided among family members who saw me as their safety net, but offered no safety in return, would now be redirected to reflect the relationships that actually added value to my life. I fell asleep not with bitterness, but with the satisfaction of making a decision aligned with my values. The same clarity I'd always brought to business, now finally applied to my personal life as well. Monday morning arrived with a sense of purpose despite my physical discomfort. Jessica arrived early to drive me to Lowell's office, helping me dress in comfortable but professional attire, an important psychological boost after days in hospital gowns and pajamas. "Are you sure you're up for this?" she asked, noting how carefully I moved. "Lowell would come to you." "I need the change of scenery," I said, "and this meeting matters. I want to be in the right environment for it." She nodded, understanding, without being told that whatever I was doing represented more than routine legal business. Lowell Greenfield's office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building with commanding views of the mountains. He greeted me with the practiced concern of someone who deals regularly with clients in various states of crisis. "Rebecca, I was sorry to hear about your health challenges," he said, guiding me to a comfortable chair in his spacious office. "Jessica mentioned this was urgent. How can I help?" I placed the folder containing my estate inventory on his desk. "I need comprehensive revisions to my will and all associated estate documents. Today, if possible." He raised an eyebrow but reached for the folder without comment. Lowell and I had a long-standing professional relationship built on mutual respect. If I said changes were needed urgently, he knew I had valid reasons. He reviewed the documents methodically, his expression revealing nothing. "You've been thorough," he said finally. "What specifically do you wish to change?" "Everything," I replied simply. "The current will leaves the bulk of my estate to family members, my brother Daniel, sister Vanessa, parents, and various nieces and nephews. I want all family members removed entirely." This did surprise him, though his professional demeanor barely flickered. "I see. And the new beneficiaries?" "I'm establishing a foundation, the Collins Opportunity Fund. 50% of my estate will go there, with a mission to provide scholarships and mentoring for women entrepreneurs, particularly those facing health crises or other significant challenges." He nodded, making notes. "And the remainder?" 20% to Jessica Torres, my executive assistant. 10% each to Marcos Ruiz and Sophia Wang, my senior associates. 5% to Ellen Kaplan, my neighbor. The final 5%, divided among several friends who've provided genuine support during my illness. Lowell finished writing, then looked up. "These are significant changes, Rebecca. Given your current health situation, we need to ensure they'll withstand any potential challenges. You're concerned my family might contest the will. It would be a natural response to such a complete disinheritance. The court might question if these decisions were made under duress or while your judgment was impaired by illness or medication." I smiled thinly. That's why I'm here in person, Lowell. I want you to document that I'm of sound mind, making these decisions with full awareness of their implications. We can also bring in an independent medical professional to certify my mental capacity if needed. He nodded slowly. We'll take every precaution. I'll also recommend including a strong no contest clause, though those aren't always fully enforceable in Colorado. Do whatever is necessary to ensure my wishes are carried out, I said firmly. My family has made their priorities abundantly clear during my illness. I'm simply adjusting my estate plan to reflect the reality of those relationships. Lowell didn't press for details. Another reason I valued his counsel. I'll have preliminary documents for your review by end of day, though the foundation establishment will take longer to structure properly. That's acceptable. I want the will changes executed immediately, then we can work on the foundation details as my treatment allows. As I prepared to leave, Lowell asked the question professional courtesy had prevented until now. Rebecca, is there anything else I should know? Anything that might help me protect your interests more effectively? I considered how much to share, then decided complete transparency with my attorney was prudent. My cancer treatment is exposing financial dynamics within my family that I should have recognized years ago. They've consistently expected and accepted my financial support, but when I'm the one in need, they're conspicuously absent. I'm not making these changes out of spite, Lowell. I'm making them based on a clear-eyed assessment of where my legacy will be most valued and best utilized. He nodded, understanding evident in his expression. I'll ensure your wishes are protected, Rebecca. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're facing this without the support you deserve. As Jessica drove me home, I felt lighter despite my physical discomfort. The decision had been made, the process initiated. My legacy would reflect my values, not obligations to people who valued what I could provide more than who I was. When we arrived at my condo, I was surprised to find Daniel, waiting in the lobby, pacing with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Where have you been?" he demanded as soon as he saw me. "I've been calling for hours. The nurse said you had gone out but wouldn't tell me where." "I had business to attend to," I replied calmly, allowing Jessica to help me toward the elevator. "Business? You just had major surgery. What could possibly be so urgent?" I studied my brother's face, the genuine confusion there, the inability to imagine what priority could compete with his immediate concerns. That, perhaps more than anything, confirmed I'd made the right decision. "My affairs needed attention," I said simply. "Jessica, could you help me upstairs? I need to rest before my treatment appointment this afternoon." Daniel followed us into the elevator, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "What? Affairs? What aren't you telling me?" "Many things, apparently. Just as you've kept many things from me, like your true priorities when I needed you." The elevator doors opened on my floor, and Jessica guided me toward my door, Daniel still trailing behind. "Is this about me not visiting enough? I told you, the Mendelsohn case is consuming all my time." "No, Daniel," I interrupted, turning to face him as Jessica unlocked my door. "This isn't about visits or the Mendelsohn case. This is about finally seeing clearly what I've been ignoring for years, that in our family, support only flows in one direction, my direction." His expression hardened. "If this is about money, it's about reciprocity, about showing up when it matters, about recognizing that relationships can't survive when one person does all the giving and others do all the taking." "That's not fair," he protested, the familiar refrain whenever uncomfortable truths were spoken. "Maybe not," I conceded, suddenly, tired beyond words. "But it's accurate. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to rest before my treatment." I stepped into my condo, Jessica following and closing the door firmly behind us, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway with the confused expression of someone who had always believed his perspective was the only valid one. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked quietly. "Yes," I said, and realized it was true despite everything. For the first time in a very long time, I think I actually am. The days following my meeting with Lowell blurred together in a haze of treatment appointments, medication schedules, and carefully managed work calls. My body rebelled against the aggressive treatment protocol, leaving me exhausted in ways I'd never experienced before. Yet through the physical distress, I felt a curious mental clarity, as if removing the weight of familial obligation had freed cognitive resources I hadn't realized were occupied. My phone buzzed persistently with messages from Daniel over the following days, each more demanding than the last. What business had I been handling? Why wouldn't I tell him what was going on? When could he come by to talk? I answered none of them, focusing instead on the battle my body was fighting and the work Jessica and I managed to accomplish during my stronger hours. A week after my visit to Lowell's office, the revised will documents arrived via secure courier. Jessica set the thick envelope on my lap as I reclined in the adjustable hospital bed that now dominated my living room. "Do you need anything else?" "Before I make those client calls," she asked, gesturing to the legal papers. "No, this is perfect. Thank you." After she moved to the guest bedroom I'd converted to a temporary office, I opened the envelope and began methodically reading through each page. Lowell had executed my wishes exactly as specified. The language was clear and unambiguous. My estate, valued conservatively at just over $8. $4 million, including business assets, would pass entirely to the newly established Collins Opportunity Fund and the individual beneficiaries I'd selected. People who had demonstrated genuine care and support during my illness. Not a penny to family members who had demonstrated, through their actions rather than their words, that they saw me primarily as a resource rather than a person deserving of the same care I'd always offered them. I signed each page with a steady hand, the act feeling not vindictive but clarifying, like finally balancing a ledger that had been askew for decades. I had always believed that family came first, that biological connections trumped all other considerations. Now I understood that true family was defined by mutual care and respect, not shared DNA. The doorbell rang just as I finished signing the last document. Jessica emerged from the makeshift office, but I waved her back. "I know who it is," I said. "Let them in, please." She hesitated, protective instincts evident in her expression. "Are you sure? You don't have to see anyone if you're not feeling up to it." "I'm sure. This conversation is overdue." Jessica nodded and went to the door. Moments later, Daniel strode into my living room, followed by my sister Vanessa, both wearing expressions that mingled concern with indignation. "Finally," Daniel said, taking in the medical equipment, the medication arranged on the side table, the legal documents spread across my lap. "We've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been occupied," I replied calmly, gathering the signed papers and returning them to their envelope. Cancer treatment tends to consume one's schedule. Vanessa moved closer, her theatrical training evident in the performance of sisterly concern she was now delivering. "We've been so worried, Beck. Mom and Dad are beside themselves. Why aren't you returning calls?" "Because I'm prioritizing my health and my business," I said simply. "The two things that actually require my attention right now." Daniel's gaze fixed on the envelope in my hands, the legal return address visible on its surface. "Greenfield and Associates? You're meeting with your estate attorney while ignoring your family?" "I'm updating my affairs while focusing on the people who have actually shown up for me during this crisis," I corrected. "There's a difference." A tense silence filled the room as my meaning registered on their faces. "What is that supposed to mean?" Vanessa asked, her voice rising slightly. "It means exactly what I said. I've spent my adult life being the family safety net, helping with tuition, covering rent shortfalls, financing home repairs, bankrolling holiday gatherings. When I needed support, not even financial, just emotional presence, Where were you?" Daniel's expression hardened. "So this is some kind of punishment? You're rewriting your will because I couldn't drop everything to hold your hand in the hospital?" The dismissiveness of his characterization, reducing my life-threatening illness to holding hands, confirmed everything I'd realized during those long nights alone in my hospital room. This isn't about punishment, Daniel. It's about alignment. I'm ensuring my legacy reflects my values and honors the relationships that have proven meaningful in action, not just in name. Vanessa stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes, the same tears I'd seen when she wanted help with her car payment or needed a loan for a theater workshop. "Becca, you can't mean that. We're your family." "Family is as family does," I replied quietly. "When was the last time either of you called just to check on me, not to ask for something? When have you ever considered what I might need rather than what I could provide?" They exchanged glances, clearly struggling to recall such an instance. "That's what I thought," I continued. "My illness has been clarifying. It's shown me who views me as a person worthy of care versus who views me as a resource to be tapped. I'm adjusting my estate planning accordingly." Daniel's face flushed with anger. "You've always been self-righteous, but this is beyond the pale. What exactly are you doing? Cutting us out entirely?" "My estate planning is private," I said, echoing his own words from countless conversations when I'd asked about his financial decisions. "But yes, I've made significant changes to reflect the relationships that actually add value to my life." "You won't get away with this," Daniel said, lawyer mode activating. "We can challenge it. Undue influence, diminished capacity due to medication." "I've taken every precaution against such challenges," I interrupted. "Medical certification of my mental capacity, video documentation of my instructions to Lowell, witnesses with no financial interest in the outcome. But by all means, waste your legal expertise trying to claim an inheritance you've done nothing to deserve." Vanessa began crying in earnest now, always quick to emotional displays when other tactics failed. "How can you be so cold? After everything we've been through together?" "That's just it, Vanessa. We haven't been through this together. I've been going through cancer largely alone, while you've been too busy with rehearsals to visit more than once, and Daniel has been too consumed, with billable hours to show up at all. That's not togetherness. That's abandonment dressed up as busy schedules." The harsh truth hung in the air between us. Jessica appeared in the doorway, concern evident in her expression. "Ms. Collins, it's time for your medication, and Dr. Patel's office just called. They need to move tomorrow's appointment earlier." I nodded gratefully for the interruption. "Thank you, Jessica. Would you mind showing my brother and sister out? I need to rest before my next work call." "Of course." She moved toward them, professional but firm. Daniel stood his ground. "This isn't over, Rebecca. You're making a mistake you'll regret." "The only mistake I regret is spending years prioritizing people who wouldn't do the same for me," I replied, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. "Goodbye, Daniel. Vanessa." Jessica gently but insistently guided them toward the door, closing it firmly behind them. When she returned, her expression was troubled. "Are you all right? That seemed intense." I sighed, leaning back against my pillows. It was necessary, long overdue, actually. She nodded, understanding without needing the details. That was another thing I'd come to appreciate about Jessica. Her emotional intelligence far exceeded her years. She knew when to ask questions and when to simply provide quiet support. "Your medication," she said, handing me the prescribed doses with a glass of water. "And I've rescheduled tomorrow's meetings to accommodate the earlier treatment appointment." "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate for all she'd done. "Jessica, when this is all over, when I'm back on my feet, we should discuss your future at the firm. You've demonstrated capabilities far beyond your current position." She smiled, a quick flash of pleasure before returning to professional mode. Let's focus on getting you well first. The firm will be there when you're ready. After she returned to her work calls, I lay back and closed my eyes, processing the confrontation with my siblings. Their reactions had been exactly as I'd anticipated. Daniel. Defaulting to legal threats, Vanessa to tears, both genuinely shocked that actions might have consequences. I felt no satisfaction in their distress, only a quiet certainty that I was finally honoring my own worth after decades of one-sided giving. The revised will wasn't about punishing them. It was about recognizing and rewarding the relationships that had proven genuine when tested by crisis. My medication began to take effect, dulling the ever-present pain and fogging my thoughts around the edges. Before drifting into uneasy sleep, I made a mental note to call Lowell in the morning. Daniel's threat to contest the will wasn't empty. He was too good an attorney to bluff about something so significant. We might need additional safeguards to ensure my wishes were honored. I awoke to the sound of my phone ringing, the particular tone I'd assigned to my parents impossible to ignore even through medication-induced drowsiness. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but some deeply ingrained sense of filial duty, the very instinct I was working to recalibrate, made me reach for it. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice still rough with sleep. "Rebecca Ann Collins," my mother began, using my full name as she always did when displeased. "What on earth did you say to your brother and sister? They're absolutely beside themselves." "No, how are you feeling?" "No, I'm sorry we haven't visited." Just straight to defending Daniel and Vanessa, the familiar family pattern reasserting itself immediately. "I told them the truth, Mom, that I'm revising my estate planning to reflect the relationships that have actually supported me during my illness." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You're cutting them out of your will? Your own flesh and blood?" "I'm redirecting my legacy to where it will be valued and used meaningfully," I corrected. "And yes, that means family members who see me only as a financial resource are no longer beneficiaries." "This is that assistant of yours, isn't it? Putting ideas in your head when you're vulnerable. Your father and I always said you were too trusting with employees." The irony of being called too trusting by the very people who had repeatedly taken advantage of that trust wasn't lost on me. Jessica has nothing to do with my decisions, though she has shown more genuine care during my illness than my entire family combined, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the familiar frustrated anger rising in my chest. This is about finally recognizing patterns I've allowed to continue for far too long. Patterns? What patterns? We're a normal family with normal disagreements. This dramatic overreaction isn't like you, Rebecca. That's just it, Mom. What you call normal is actually deeply dysfunctional. It's normal for me to help everyone financially whenever asked, but it's also normal for everyone to disappear when I need support that doesn't benefit them directly. That's not family. That's a one-sided arrangement I'm no longer willing to maintain. My mother's voice hardened. So all those years of family loyalty mean nothing because we couldn't drop everything the moment you got sick. Your father can barely drive in city traffic anymore. Vanessa doesn't even own a car. Daniel has responsibilities. Stop, I interrupted. The same word I'd used with Daniel, a boundary I should have established years ago. Everyone has responsibilities and limitations. I've always respected that by finding ways to help that, worked within those constraints. Not once has anyone extended me the same consideration. This is absurd. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me recently, Mom? Name one thing in the past decade where you've inconvenienced yourself to support me, not the other way around. The silence that followed spoke volumes. She was genuinely struggling to identify an example. We raised you, she finally said. The weakness of the response evident even to her. We gave you life. Yes, you did, and I'm grateful for that. But parenthood doesn't entitle you to a lifetime of one-way support and a guaranteed inheritance, especially when you've made it clear my health crisis isn't important enough to warrant actual presence. You're being cruel, Rebecca. This isn't how we raised you. No, you raised me to believe family always comes first. I just didn't realize that only applied to everyone else's needs, never my own. I heard my father's voice in the background, asking questions I couldn't quite make out. My mother's muffled response, then his voice growing louder as he apparently took the phone. Rebecca? My father's deeper voice replaced my mother's. What's this about changing your will? I sighed, exhaustion washing over me at having to repeat the same explanation. Hi, Dad. Yes, I'm updating my estate planning to better reflect my values and the relationships that have proven meaningful during my illness. And we don't qualify? His tone was more hurt than angry, which made it harder to maintain my resolve. My father had always been the gentler parent, less demanding than my mother, though equally absent when I needed support. When was the last time you called just to check on me, Dad? Not because Mom handed you the phone, not because you needed something, but because you genuinely wanted to know how I was doing? His hesitation was answer enough. I've spent my adult life being the family fixer, the provider, the safety net, I continued. I never minded that role until I needed the same support in return and discovered it wasn't available. That's been illuminating. We're getting older, Rebecca. Travel is difficult. You know that. I do know that. I also know there are phones, video calls, even greeting cards. I know there are ways to show care that don't require physical presence. None of those options were exercised either. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had the resigned quality I remembered from childhood disagreements with my mother. You've always been stubborn once your mind is made up, just like your mother, though neither of you would admit it. The comparison might have amused me under different circumstances. Now it just underscored how little he actually knew me. My decision-making process, methodical, evidence-based, careful, was nothing like my mother's emotional reactivity. This isn't stubbornness. Dad, it's clarity. For the first time, I'm seeing our family dynamics without the filter of obligation that's colored my perception for decades. And you don't feel any obligation to the people who gave you life, who helped you become who you are. I feel gratitude for the start you gave me, I acknowledged. But obligation? No, not anymore. Not when it's never been reciprocal. He sighed heavily. Your mother wants to come see you, to talk about this in person. I'm in the middle of aggressive cancer treatment, Dad. I don't have the energy for emotional confrontations right now. Once I'm stronger, we can discuss this face-to-face if you want. But my decision is made. The documents are signed, and my reasons are valid regardless of whether anyone in the family agrees with them. Signed already? His voice sharpened with surprise. You've already done it? Yes. A week ago. Another murmured conversation I couldn't quite hear. Then my mother was back on the line, her voice tight with controlled anger. You've always been difficult, Rebecca. Always had to do things your way, never considering how it affects others. But this is beyond selfish. The accusation of selfishness from someone who couldn't be bothered to visit her daughter during cancer surgery might have wounded me before. Now it merely confirmed I'd made the right decision. I need to rest now, Mom. My next treatment is tomorrow, and I need to conserve my energy. Don't you dare hang up on me when we're discussing something this important. Goodbye, Mom. I'll call when I'm feeling stronger. I ended the call despite her protests, then turned off my phone entirely. The confrontation had drained what little energy I'd managed to accumulate during my brief rest. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing as the oncology counselor had suggested during our sessions. Jessica appeared in the doorway, concern evident in her expression. Everything okay? I heard your voice rising. Family, I said simply. They've learned about the will changes. She nodded, understanding immediately. Can I get you anything? Tea? Something to eat before your medication? Just some water, please. And could you call Lowell's office? Tell him Daniel is already talking about contesting the will. We might need additional precautions. Of course. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with water and a light snack, despite my not requesting it. These small acts of thoughtful care, anticipating needs before they were expressed, highlighted everything that was missing from my family relationships. The next morning brought another treatment session, this one leaving me more nauseated and exhausted than previous rounds. Jessica drove me home afterward, her careful navigation of Denver's potholed streets a silent acknowledgement of my discomfort. There's someone waiting at your building, she said as we approached the familiar structure, in the visitor parking area. I peered through the car window, recognizing my mother's distinctive posture despite not having seen her in months. Somehow she'd gotten past the building's security protocols, likely by using the family connection, playing on the sympathies of staff who knew me. Do you want me to tell her you're not up for visitors? Jessica asked, correctly reading my hesitation. I considered it, tempted by the ease of avoidance. But the conversation would need to happen eventually, and postponing it would only allow tensions to fester. No, it's all right. Better to have this out now. Jessica parked in my reserved space, then came around to help me from the car. The post-treatment weakness made every movement an effort, my body feeling like it belonged to someone else, someone older and infinitely more fragile. My mother watched our approach, her expression a complex mixture of concern, determination, and the particular brand of judgment she'd perfected over 7 decades of life. She stepped forward as we reached the entrance. Rebecca. Her greeting was stiff, formal in a way that signaled her displeasure more clearly than anger would have. Mom, I wasn't expecting you. Clearly, you haven't been answering calls, so I had little choice but to come in person. Jessica remained beside me, a quiet support I appreciated more than I could express. I just had treatment, I said, gesturing, vaguely to my pale complexion and unsteady posture. I'm not really up for an extended discussion right now. This won't take long, my mother replied, her gaze sliding to Jessica with barely concealed suspicion. Perhaps we could speak privately? Jessica stays, I said firmly. She's helping manage my care. My mother's lips thinned with disapproval, but she nodded curtly. Fine. Shall we go upstairs? Or do you prefer to have this conversation in the lobby? Upstairs is better. I had no desire to air family grievances in full view of my neighbors and building staff. The elevator ride was silent and tense, my mother standing rigidly on one side, Jessica and I on the other. When we reached my condo, Jessica helped me to the adjustable bed, then tactfully retreated to the kitchen, visible but giving us nominal privacy. My mother remained standing, taking in the medical equipment with a slight widening of her eyes, her first real glimpse of the severity of my condition. You look terrible, she said, her bluntness both characteristic and oddly refreshing after weeks of medical professionals' careful euphemisms. Cancer treatment isn't known for its beautifying effects, I replied dryly. Why didn't you tell us it was this bad? The question caught me off guard with its implicit admission that she hadn't understood the gravity of my illness. I did tell you. Stage 3 liver cancer, major surgery, aggressive treatment protocol. What did you think that meant? She gestured, vaguely at the hospital bed, the medication array, the oxygen tank kept ready for when breathing became difficult. Not this. Not all of this. Would it have made a difference? Would you have come sooner if you'd known exactly how sick I was? She didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. We're here to discuss this will situation, Rebecca. Your father and I raised you better than this. Using your illness as an excuse to punish your family is beneath you. And there it was, the familiar redirection, the refusal to acknowledge her own role in the situation, the immediate positioning of herself as the wronged party. "This isn't about punishment," I said, the words weary with repetition. "It's about recognition. Recognition that the support I've provided over the years has been taken for granted, and that when I needed similar support, it wasn't forthcoming. So because we couldn't drop everything and rush to Denver, you're writing us out of your will. That's the very definition of punitive, Rebecca. No one asked you to drop everything. A phone call that wasn't about you, a visit once during my hospitalization, any demonstration that my illness mattered to you beyond the inconvenience it caused, that would have been enough." She crossed her arms, the defensive posture so familiar it was almost comforting in its predictability. "We raised you to be independent, to handle your own problems. I thought you'd appreciate not being coddled." The cognitive dissonance was staggering. My mother, who had called me at least monthly for financial assistance with everything from home repairs to vacation funds, was now claiming she'd been respecting my independence by remaining absent during a life-threatening crisis. There's a vast difference between coddling and basic human support, Mom. The same difference that exists between occasionally helping family and being treated as an ATM with no needs of your own. An ATM? Is that how you see our relationship? After all the sacrifices we made raising you? No, Mom. That's how you've treated our relationship for the past 15 years. I'm just finally acknowledging it. My mother's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. We're your parents. We gave you life, raised you, supported your education. My education that I paid for through scholarships and working 2 jobs," I corrected. "The same education you initially discouraged because you thought business was too aggressive for a woman. That was your father, not me. It was both of you, just like it was both of you who convinced me to cover Vanessa's rent for just a few months that turned into 3 years. Just like it was both of you who expected me to subsidize your retirement travel without ever considering that I might need to save for my own future. A future that's now in jeopardy because of cancer treatments you can't be bothered to drive an hour to support me through." My voice had risen despite my intention to remain calm, the accumulated frustration of years finding its release. Jessica appeared in the doorway, silently checking if I needed intervention. I shook my head slightly and she retreated, though I could tell she remained alert to the conversation's tone. My mother stood silently for a long moment, perhaps truly hearing me for the first time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. "I didn't come here to fight, Rebecca. I came because your father and I are concerned about you making rash decisions during a health crisis. Decisions you might regret when you're thinking more clearly." "I appreciate the concern," I said, genuinely trying to de-escalate. "But these aren't rash decisions. They're carefully considered responses to patterns I've observed for years, but was too entangled to address properly until now. My illness has been clarifying, not clouding. And this clarity tells you to disinherit your entire family? To leave everything to strangers instead? Not strangers. People who have demonstrated through actions, not just words, that they value me as a person, not a resource. People who showed up when showing up was inconvenient, not just when they needed something." My mother's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something almost like recognition crossing her features before the defensive mask returned. "And there's no room for reconsideration? No acknowledgement that families are complicated, imperfect, but still bound by something deeper than friendship or professional relationships?" "I've spent my life acknowledging exactly that, Mom. I've forgiven the imperfections, compensated for the complications, honored the bonds. What I've finally realized is that those bonds have to be mutual to be meaningful. They can't just be chains used to extract resources and support from one person while excusing everyone else from reciprocity." She was silent again, longer this time, her gaze moving around my condo, taking in the evidence of both my success and my current vulnerability. "I don't know how we got here," she said finally, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "How did we become strangers who see the same relationship so differently?" "We're not strangers," I corrected gently, my anger subsiding in the face of her confusion. "We're family who have fallen into unhealthy patterns that need correction. My estate planning changes are part of that correction, acknowledging the reality of our relationship rather than the idealized version I've maintained in my mind. And if we want to change that reality? If we want to rebuild what's been damaged?" It was the first genuine question she'd asked, the first indication she might be willing to consider her role in the situation rather than simply defending against perceived attacks. "That would be welcome," I said honestly, "but it would need to start with recognition, acknowledgement that the dynamic has been unbalanced and harmful. It would need to continue with action, not just words or temporary changes meant to secure financial benefit. And the will? Would you reconsider those changes if things improved?" The conditional nature of the question, tying familial relationship directly to inheritance, only reinforced the problematic dynamic I was trying to address. "The will reflects my current reality and values," I said carefully. "If our relationship evolves, my estate planning might evolve as well. But that can't be the motivation for change, Mom. Genuine connection can't be built on financial expectation." She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I should go. You need to rest." She gathered her purse, movement stiff with unresolved tension. "Your father will want to know we talked. Tell him I'm open to talking with him as well, when I'm feeling stronger." She paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "This illness, it's really serious, isn't it?" "Yes, Mom, it really is. And we haven't been there for you." It wasn't quite a question, not quite an admission, but it was closer to recognition than anything I'd heard from her in years. "No," I said simply, "you haven't." She nodded once, sharply, then left without another word. Jessica appeared. Moments later, a cup of tea in hand and concern in her eyes. That seemed intense. "It was," I agreed, accepting the tea gratefully, but maybe also productive in its way. For the first time, I think she might have actually heard me. "Do you think they'll come around? Your family?" I considered the question carefully, aware that my answer reflected not just my assessment of my family, but my own capacity for hope, despite evidence to the contrary. "I don't know," I said finally. "But what matters is that I've come around. I've finally recognized what I deserve in relationships and what I'm no longer willing to accept. Whether they adjust to that reality is up to them." Jessica nodded, understanding as she always did. "Your next medication is due in 20 minutes. Do you want to rest until then?" "Yes," I said, suddenly bone-weary from the emotional confrontation, on top of the physical toll of treatment. "And Jessica? Thank you for everything." She smiled, the simple, genuine expression worth more than all the familial obligations that had bound me for decades. That's what real family does, Rebecca. They show up. As she dimmed the lights and left me to rest, I thought about her words. Real family, not defined by blood or legal ties, but by presence, by reciprocity, by genuine care that expects nothing in return. It had taken cancer to teach me the difference, to show me what I'd been accepting in place of authentic connection. Now, regardless of whether my biological family ever understood or accepted my decision, I knew I'd finally honored my own worth. And that, perhaps, was the most important inheritance I could leave to myself, the recognition that I deserved, more than I'd been settling for all these years. 3 months into my treatment, the physical toll had transformed me in ways I hardly recognized. My once healthy frame had grown gaunt, my tailored business attire now hanging loosely on my diminished form. The mirror reflected a stranger, hollow-cheeked with thinning hair that had once been my pride. But the eyes looking back at me held something new, an uncompromising clarity that cancer had somehow gifted me alongside its many cruelties. My last confrontation with my family had left an uneasy silence in its wake. Daniel had retreated to legal threats delivered through increasingly formal emails, each one meticulously detailing the ways he could challenge my will once I was gone, as if his inheritance mattered more than whether I survived at all. Vanessa oscillated between tearful voicemails and social media posts obliquely referencing family betrayal without context. My parents had settled into a pattern of weekly calls that focused exclusively on their lives, their challenges, their needs, never acknowledging the battle I was fighting. It was a Tuesday morning when Dr. Patel delivered news that shifted everything once again. I sat in her office, Jessica beside me as always, as the oncologist reviewed my latest scans. "The tumor markers have decreased significantly," Dr. Patel said, a cautious smile warming her normally reserved expression. "The treatment is working better than we anticipated. I wouldn't use the word remission yet, but we're seeing very encouraging results." I nodded, processing this information with the same analytical approach I'd applied to market forecasts and investment returns throughout my career. What are the next steps? We'll continue with the current protocol for another 6 weeks, then reassess. If the improvement continues at this rate, we might be able to reduce the intensity of treatment by early summer. Hope, that dangerous, seductive emotion I'd carefully rationed since my diagnosis, bloomed unbidden in my chest. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future beyond the narrow focus of survival that had consumed me for months. "That's wonderful news," Jessica said, squeezing my hand. "Truly wonderful." It was, and yet it introduced a new complexity to the situation I'd created. My will revisions had been made in the shadow of mortality, with the pragmatic recognition that stage 3 liver cancer carried significant risk of death. Now, faced with the prospect of survival, the consequences of those decisions took on new dimensions. My family's eventual discovery that they'd been removed from my will would no longer be posthumous. I would be present to witness their reactions, to navigate the aftermath in real time. The thought should have troubled me more than it did. Instead, I felt a curious sense of rightness, of alignment between my values and my actions that had been missing for too long. Back at my condo, as Jessica helped me settle in for the afternoon of work calls we'd scheduled, my phone rang with my father's number. Unusual, as he rarely called outside their established weekly check-in. "Dad? Is everything okay?" His voice came through strained, hesitant. "Rebecca, I've been doing some thinking since your mother visited. Some reflection." I waited, years of experience with my father's communication style telling me to give him space to find his words. "I owe you an apology," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. I haven't been there for you the way I should have been. I've been making excuses. My back, the drive, your mother's anxiety. But the truth is, I was afraid." "Afraid?" I prompted when he fell silent. "Of seeing you sick. Of confronting what that might mean. You've always been the strong one, the capable one. Even as a child, you handled things most kids couldn't. I think over the years, I convinced myself you didn't need support the way others did. It was more insight than my father had offered. In decades of relationship, more vulnerability than I could remember him showing since early childhood. I needed you, Dad," I said simply, without accusation. "Not to solve anything or fix anything, just to be present." "I know that now," he said, his voice thick. "And I'm sorry I realized it so late. I'd like to visit if you're willing. Just me, not your mother. I'd like to see you to talk properly." The request surprised me. My parents had operated as a unit for as long as I could remember. My mother, the vocal force, my father, the quiet supporter of her positions. His asking to come alone represented a significant departure from established patterns. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it despite my wariness. "How about this weekend?" We arranged the details, and after we hung up, I sat in thoughtful silence, turning this development over in my mind like a complex equation seeking solution. "Everything okay?" Jessica asked, returning with the tea she'd gone to prepare. "My father wants to visit. Alone." I shared the conversation with her, this person who had become more confidant than employee during my illness. "That's unexpected," she agreed. "Are you comfortable with it?" "I think so. It feels different from my mother's visit somehow. Less confrontational, more genuine." Jessica nodded, her expression thoughtful. "People can surprise you, I suppose. Even family." "Especially family," I amended, accepting the tea with a grateful smile. The days until my father's visit passed in a rhythm that had become almost normal. Treatment sessions that left me drained but no longer devastated. Work meetings conducted via video from my adjustable bed. Medication schedules that punctuated time more reliably than any clock. The home health nurse who visited 3 times weekly noted improvements in my vital signs, small victories in the war. My body was fighting against cells that had forgotten their purpose. Saturday morning brought unseasonable sunshine, the kind of perfect Denver spring day that made even illness seem somehow less oppressive. Jessica had offered to be present for my father's visit, but I'd declined. This conversation needed to happen without witnesses or buffers. He arrived precisely at 11, the punctuality that had defined his teaching career evident even in retirement. When I opened the door, the shock in his expression was poorly concealed. He hadn't seen me since my diagnosis, hadn't witnessed the physical transformation that cancer and its treatments had wrought. "Rebecca," he said softly, and in that single word I heard grief, regret, and something like love, uncomplicated by the conditions that had so often accompanied it in our family. "Come in, Dad." He followed me into the living room, his gaze taking in the medical equipment that still dominated the space despite my improving condition. We sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with years of unspoken expectations and assumptions. "You look better than I feared," he said finally. "Your mother's description had me imagining the worst." "It was worse a few weeks ago," I acknowledged. "The treatment is starting to work. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." Relief washed over his features. "That's good news. The best news." A silence settled between us, not entirely uncomfortable but heavy with all that needed saying. "I've been thinking about what you said," my father began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "About family being defined by actions, not just shared DNA." I nodded, waiting. "You're right." The admission seemed to cost him something, his shoulders dropping slightly with the weight of it. I have taken you for granted. Expected your help without offering the same in return. It wasn't intentional, but that doesn't make it any less wrong." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me through sleepless nights and painful treatment sessions. Why was it always one-sided? Was it something about me? Something I did that made it seem like I didn't need reciprocity? My father considered this, his expression troubled. "Part of it was who you've always been, capable, independent, seemingly unshakable. You never asked for help, even when you were young. Remember when you broke your arm in 7th grade? You set your own books up, figured out how to manage everything one-handed before any of us even thought to offer assistance." I remembered. I also remembered wishing someone would notice how difficult it was, how much I was struggling beneath the competent exterior. "And then there was your success," he continued. You achieved so much so young, it was easy to see you as separate somehow, operating in a different sphere where normal family give and take didn't apply. Your mother and I, we started to see your financial assistance as a natural extension of your success rather than the generous choice it actually was. And Daniel? Vanessa? My father sighed, a sound heavy with recognition. They followed our lead, I suppose. We modeled treating you as the family resource, and they learned the lesson well. Too well. His candor was unexpected, almost disconcerting after decades of deflection and minimization. This was the father I remembered from early childhood. Thoughtful, perceptive, willing to acknowledge difficult truths. Why the change? I asked. Why are you seeing this now when you couldn't or wouldn't before? He was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. 2 things. First, your mother's visit shook her more than she'll admit. Seeing you like this, hearing you speak your truth so clearly, it forced a reckoning she wasn't prepared for. She came home different, quieter. It made me realize I needed to see for myself, to hear you directly. I nodded, waiting for the second reason. And then last week, I had a minor health scare. Nothing like what you're facing, he added quickly. Just chest pains that turned out to be anxiety. But for a few hours, I thought it might be a heart attack, and I found myself wondering, who would be there for me if I needed help? Who would show up without being asked? And the answer wasn't comfortable, Rebecca. Not comfortable at all. The vulnerability in his admission moved me in ways anger and defensiveness never could. Here, finally, was recognition, acknowledgement of the imbalance I'd been trying to articulate. I'm not telling you this to change your mind about your will, he said, surprising me again with his directness. Your mother is fixated on that, but I realized it's beside the point. The real issue is the relationship we have while we're all still here. The inheritance is just a symptom, not the disease. Yes, I said simply, something tight in my chest easing at his understanding. Exactly that. I don't know if things can be repaired, he continued. I wouldn't blame you if you've decided they can't be, but I'd like to try, if you're willing. Not for any financial consideration, not to secure an inheritance, but because you're my daughter, and I've failed you. I'd like the chance to do better. I studied him, this man who had shaped so much of who I was, my work ethic, my analytical mind, my reserved approach to emotion, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none, only a genuine regret that seemed to have aged. Him beyond his 72 years. I'd like that too, I said finally. But it has to be different, Dad. Really different. Not just temporary changes until the crisis passes, or until you think I've forgotten the reality of how things have been. I understand. He nodded, his expression serious. I can only speak for myself, not your mother or your siblings. But, for my part, I'm committed to real change, whatever that looks like. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground that had lain fallow for decades, expectations never articulated, resentments never addressed, assumptions that had calcified into seemingly immutable family law. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly seen by my father, my needs and boundaries recognized as valid rather than inconvenient disruptions to established patterns. When he finally rose to leave, he hesitated, then asked a question that revealed how much he'd been listening. Would it be helpful if I came for your next treatment session? Not to intrude, but to be present. To show up, as you put it. The offer, genuine, without conditions or expectations of praise, touched me deeply. Yes, I'd like that. Tuesday at 10, University Hospital Oncology Center. He nodded, committing it to memory with the same careful attention he'd once given to his teaching schedule. I'll be there. After he left, I sat in the quiet apartment, processing what had just occurred. One conversation couldn't undo decades of imbalance, couldn't instantly transform family dynamics that had been set in motion before I was old enough to recognize them for what they were. But it was a beginning, a genuine acknowledgement that change was needed, not just desired. When Jessica called to check in, I shared the conversation with her, still somewhat amazed by its depth and honesty. "That's remarkable," she said. "Do you think he means it? About wanting to change the relationship?" "I think he does," I replied, surprising myself with my certainty. Whether he can sustain it, whether it can influence how my mother and siblings interact with me, that's less clear. But I believe he genuinely wants to try. "And the will? Did you discuss it specifically?" "No, though he mentioned it. Said he understood it wasn't about the money, it was about the relationship. That's more insight than anyone else in my family has managed." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "So, what happens now?" "Now we see if actions match words," I said. "If he shows up on Tuesday, if he continues to engage in this new way, that will tell me more than any promises could." And he did show up, precisely 15 minutes early for my Tuesday treatment, looking somewhat out of place in the oncology waiting room, but determined to be there nonetheless. He sat beside me through the 3-hour infusion, making no demands on my limited energy, simply present in a way he hadn't been since my childhood. The following week, he came again. And the week after that. Small, consistent demonstrations that his commitment to change was more than just words offered in a moment of emotion. My mother remained conspicuously absent, though my father reported their conversations about my improving condition. Daniel maintained his legal posturing, though with decreasing frequency and intensity. Vanessa, unpredictable as always, oscillated between emotional distance and performative concern, depending on factors I couldn't quite discern. By early June, my treatment had been scaled back as Dr. Patel had cautiously predicted. The tumor markers continued to decrease, my energy slowly returning, my body beginning the long process of recovery from both the disease and its cure. I started working from the office 2 days a week, a schedule that exhausted me but provided a welcome return to some semblance of normalcy. It was during this period of cautious optimism that Lowell contacted me, requesting a meeting to discuss developments related to your estate planning. Curious but not concerned, I agreed to see him at his office the following day. "Rebecca, good to see you looking stronger," he greeted me, the professional warmth in his manner genuine after so many years of collaboration. "Thank you for coming." In on short notice. "Of course, your message sounded important." He nodded, gesturing for me to take a seat before settling behind his desk. "I wanted to update you on some legal maneuvering that's been occurring regarding your estate planning changes." My attention sharpened. "Daniel?" "Yes. He's been exploring potential challenges to your revised will, should it ever be executed. Nothing has been filed. He can't actually contest a will while you're alive. But he's been consulting with several colleagues who specialize in estate litigation." This wasn't surprising, given Daniel's legal threats and his obvious anger at being removed from my will. What did surprise me was my own reaction, not anger or defensiveness, but a kind of resigned sadness that my brother was focusing his considerable talents on fighting my wishes rather than repairing our relationship. "What does this mean practically?" I asked, shifting into the analytical mode that had served me well in business. At this point, nothing concrete. I'm monitoring the situation through professional channels. But I wanted you to be aware, especially given your improved health outlook. The assumption when we made these changes was that execution of the will might be imminent due to your condition. Now that your prognosis is more positive, we have time to strengthen the arrangements against potential challenges. I nodded, appreciating Lowell's forthright approach. "What do you recommend?" "Several things. First, we should update the medical certification of your capacity, documenting that these decisions were made with full awareness and without undue influence. Second, we might consider a living trust rather than relying solely on the will. Trusts are generally more difficult to contest. Finally, I would recommend video documentation of your wishes, explaining in your own words the reasoning behind your decisions. All reasonable precautions, I agreed. Let's proceed with all three. Lowell made notes, then hesitated slightly before continuing. There's one other matter. Your father contacted me last week. This was unexpected. My father? Why? He wanted to understand the structure of the Collins Opportunity Fund you've established as your primary beneficiary. Not to challenge it, but to explore how he might contribute to it during his lifetime. I sat back, genuinely surprised. Contribute to it? Why? He didn't elaborate extensively, but he mentioned wanting to support your legacy in a meaningful way. He seemed particularly interested in the fund's focus on women entrepreneurs facing health challenges. This was so far outside my expectations that I struggled to process it. My father, who had never shown particular interest in my business, success beyond pride in my achievements, wanting to contribute financially to a foundation I'd established. It represented a shift I hadn't anticipated, a tangible demonstration of respect for my values and priorities. What did you tell him? That I would need to consult with you before sharing any details about the fund's structure. Client confidentiality remains paramount. Thank you. I considered the implications of my father's request. I'd like to speak with him directly about this before making any decisions, but I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. After leaving Lowell's office, I drove to Cherry Creek Mall, a place I rarely visited during my working years, but which now offered the combination of indoor walking opportunities and frequent rest areas my recovering body required. As I slowly made my circuit of the upper level, I contemplated what my father's gesture might mean. Was it a genuine desire to support something meaningful to me? Or a sophisticated attempt to work his way back into my estate planning through the foundation? The cynical interpretation would have been easy to adopt given our family history, but it felt inconsistent with the authentic engagement my father had demonstrated in recent weeks. I was deep in these thoughts when I quite literally ran into Elaine, Daniel's wife, outside an upscale boutique. The collision was gentle. My pace these days was anything but rapid, but the shock on her face when she recognized me was pronounced. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." "It's fine," I assured her, taking a moment to catch my breath. "No harm done." Elaine stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain how to proceed given the family tensions. We had never been particularly close. She had always treated me with the careful politeness reserved for wealthy in-laws rather than genuine warmth, but there had never been open conflict between us either. "You look well," she offered, the polite fiction so at odds with my obviously diminished state that I almost laughed. "Cancer chic is the latest trend," I replied dryly. "Very exclusive." Her discomfort increased visibly. "I didn't mean... That came out wrong." "It's all right, Elaine, I know what you meant." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "Daniel doesn't know I'm contacting you," she said abruptly. "He would be furious if he knew." This unexpected turn captured my full attention. "Contacting me?" We bumped into each other by chance. She glanced around nervously, then gestured to a nearby seating area. "Could we sit for a moment? I've been trying to find a way to reach out that wouldn't trigger notifications on Daniel's phone. He monitors my calls and messages." The statement was disturbing on multiple levels. I followed her to the seating area, lowering myself carefully onto one of the plush benches. "What's going on, Elaine?" She twisted her wedding ring anxiously, a habit I'd noticed years ago during family gatherings. "Daniel isn't telling you the whole truth about why he couldn't be there during your surgery, your treatments. It wasn't just work or the kids." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "We've been having serious financial problems for almost 2 years now. The firm lost several major clients after that scandal with the senior partner. Daniel's income dropped by almost 40%, but he wouldn't cut back on any expenses. The house, the kids' schools, the club memberships. He was counting on she hesitated, your generosity to help bridge the gap until things improved. The picture was becoming clearer, filling in gaps in my understanding that had nagged at me for months. My generosity meaning my eventual death and his inheritance. She flinched but didn't deny it. He had it all planned out. How he'd use your business stake to secure loans. How he'd leverage the real estate. When you got sick, he saw it as a solution to our problems. The cold calculation behind this revelation should have shocked me more than it did. Instead, it felt like confirmation of what I'd already sensed, that Daniel's absence during my illness wasn't just about busy schedules or emotional avoidance, but a deeper, more pragmatic distancing. Why are you telling me this, Elaine? She looked down at her hands, still twisting that ring. Because it's wrong. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I can't keep living with these secrets and pretenses. Does Daniel know you feel this way? We've fought about it constantly. About his treatment of you. About the financial decisions. About all of it. That's why he watches my communications so closely. He's afraid I'll reach out to you or your attorney. The control dynamics she was describing raised additional concerns beyond the financial deception. Elaine, are you safe? Is this just about money? Or is there more I should be worried about? She shook her head quickly. He's not physically abusive, if that's what you're asking. Just controlling. Especially since the money problem started. Everything has to be his way, his decisions. And what do you want now? I asked, trying to understand her motivation for this confession. I want out, she said simply. I've contacted a divorce attorney, started putting aside small amounts he won't notice, but it's going to be ugly when it happens, and I needed you to know the truth before then. You deserved that much from someone in this family. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the most honest conversation about family dynamics would come not from my blood relatives, but from an in-law preparing to leave the fold. I appreciate your candor, I said finally. It can't have been easy to approach me like this. It wasn't, she agreed. But continuing to be complicit in how they've treated you was becoming unbearable, especially after seeing you in the hospital. That one time, so sick, so alone despite having a family who should have been surrounding you with support. I remembered that brief visit, Elaine accompanying Daniel, saying little but observing everything with those careful eyes that missed nothing. I'd interpreted her silence as discomfort with illness or lack of interest in my condition. Now I wondered how much she had been seeing and for how long. What happens next for you? I asked. I finish my preparations, then file. The kids are almost grown. Sophie's already at college. Jason graduates next year. It's time for me to stop enabling behavior I know is wrong. Her words echoed my own realizations about my role in our family's dysfunctional patterns. Different circumstances, similar conclusions, that continuing to participate in damaging dynamics only ensured their perpetuation. If you need support when the time comes, reach out, I offered, surprising myself with the sincerity of the gesture. Not financial support, I clarified, but a friendly voice who understands the family complexities. She smiled slightly, perhaps the first genuine expression I'd seen from her in years. Thank you. I might take you up on that. We parted ways with a new understanding between us. Not quite friendship, but a mutual recognition of difficult truths and the courage required to face them. That evening, as I reviewed the day's revelations from the comfort of my condo, I realized that my illness had catalyzed not just changes in my own perspective, but ripple effects throughout my family system. My father's gradual shift toward genuine engagement. Elaine's decision to break free from controlling patterns. Even my mother's uncharacteristic silence suggested some level of internal reckoning, though whether it would lead to meaningful change remained to be seen. Daniel and Vanessa remained entrenched in the old dynamics, unable or unwilling to recognize how those patterns had damaged our relationships. Perhaps they never would. The possibility of permanent estrangement from my siblings was painful to contemplate, but I was learning to accept that not all relationships could or should be salvaged, regardless of blood ties. The following morning, I called my father and invited him to lunch at a quiet restaurant near my office, neutral territory, for the conversation I wanted to have. He arrived early, as was his habit, already seated at the corner table I'd reserved. The careful way he stood when he saw me approach, offering help only with his expression rather than assuming I needed it, these small adjustments spoke volumes about his efforts to relate to me differently. "You're looking stronger every time. I see you," he said as we settled at the table. "Dr. Patel must be pleased with your progress." "She is," I confirmed. "The latest scans show continued improvement. We're cautiously optimistic." "That's wonderful news, Rebecca. Truly wonderful." We ordered, keeping the conversation light until our meals arrived and the server had retreated to a discreet distance. "Dad, I spoke with Lowell yesterday," I began, watching his expression carefully. "He mentioned you'd contacted him about the Collins Opportunity Fund." My father nodded, setting down his fork to give the conversation his full attention. "I should have come to you directly. I apologize for that. I wasn't sure if you'd be open to discussing it, given everything that's happened." "I'm open to hearing what you had in mind." He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts in that methodical way I'd inherited from him. "When you were diagnosed, when we failed to support you in the ways that mattered, I did a lot of thinking about legacy, about what I've built in my life and what will remain after I'm gone." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "My career was teaching mathematics. I helped students understand equations, theorems, principles that would serve them throughout their lives. But I never built anything tangible, never created something that would outlast me in a meaningful way." This was more personal reflection than my father typically shared, and I listened with growing interest. "You have," he continued, "you've built a successful business, helped clients secure their futures, created real value in the world, and now you're establishing this foundation to help women facing challenges similar to yours. It's impressive. And it made me realize I'd like to contribute to something meaningful before it's too late." "By donating to the foundation," I clarified. "Yes, not a fortune. Your mother and I live comfortably but modestly on our pensions. But we do have the house, fully paid for, worth quite a bit in today's market. We've discussed downsizing for years but never took action. I'd like to make that move now. Use a portion of the proceeds to contribute to your foundation." The proposal was unexpected, touching in its genuine desire to support something I valued rather than extract value for himself. "This isn't about trying to get back into your will," he added, correctly reading my hesitation. "I understand and accept your decision there. This is about wanting to be part of something meaningful, to contribute to a legacy I'm proud of. Your legacy." I studied him, this man I'd known all my life yet was only now beginning to truly understand. "I appreciate that, Dad. I really do. But I'd like to suggest an alternative approach." He looked surprised but receptive. "I'm listening." "Instead of contributing financially to the foundation, I'd like you to consider serving on its advisory board. Your experience in education, your analytical mind, your understanding of how to nurture potential, these would be valuable assets as we establish the mentoring programs that will accompany the financial support." It was his turn to look surprised. "You'd want that? After everything?" The foundation is about creating opportunities for women facing medical and financial challenges simultaneously, about recognizing potential and providing both resources and guidance to help realize it. Your teaching background is directly relevant to that mission. He sat back, visibly moved by the invitation. "I would be honored, Rebecca. Truly honored." "There's one condition," I added. "This needs to be your project, not an obligation you take on out of guilt or an attempt to repair our relationship. The Foundation's work is too important for anything less than genuine commitment." "I understand," he said solemnly, "and I can promise you genuine commitment. The chance to work alongside you, to contribute to something meaningful, that's a gift I won't take lightly." We spent the remainder of lunch discussing the Foundation's structure, the types of support it would offer, the criteria for selecting recipients. My father's questions were thoughtful, his suggestions practical and insightful. For the first time in my adult life, we were collaborating as equals, each bringing valuable perspective to a shared goal. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind throughout our conversation. "Does this mean, are you reconsidering your will decisions?" I appreciated his directness, the willingness to address the elephant in the room rather than dancing around it. "Not at this point," I replied honestly. "The Foundation and individual bequests still reflect my values and priorities. But I'm open to continuing our conversations, to seeing where this new direction in our relationship might lead. The will isn't set in stone. It can evolve as circumstances and relationships evolve." He nodded, accepting this answer without the defensiveness or manipulation that would have characterized similar conversations in the past. "Fair enough. For now, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be involved with the Foundation, regardless of any other considerations." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, I was struck by how different this interaction had been from our family's typical dynamics. No guilt, no obligation, no transactional expectations, just two adults with shared goals finding ways to collaborate effectively. That evening, as I sat in my condo watching the sunset paint the Denver skyline in shades of gold and amber, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. Cancer had stripped away pretenses, forced reckonings, catalyzed changes that might otherwise have taken decades or never occurred at all. The physical battle was not yet won, might never be fully won given the nature of my diagnosis. But the clarity it had brought to my life felt like its own kind of victory. I had finally recognized my worth beyond what I could provide to others, established boundaries that honored that worth, and realigned my legacy to reflect my values rather than automatic biological entitlements. Some relationships had been damaged, perhaps irreparably. Others were transforming in ways I wouldn't have thought possible. New connections had formed with people who showed up without expectation of return, who offered support not as transaction but as genuine care. The financial cost of my medical treatment remained substantial, draining resources I'd carefully accumulated over decades of disciplined saving and investment. But the cost of continuing in unhealthy family dynamics, the emotional drain, the one-sided giving, the taken-for-granted support, would have been far higher in the long run. As darkness settled over the city, I opened my laptop and began a new document. Not a will this time, not a financial ledger, but a journal entry addressed to my future self. When my family refused to help with my medical bills, I quietly removed them from my $1 million will. But that was just the beginning of the story, not the end. The truth was never about the money. It was about finally recognizing my own worth and requiring others to do the same. Some relationships couldn't survive that recognition. Others transformed in unexpected ways. And through it all, I discovered that family isn't defined by DNA, but by who shows up when showing up matters most. Whatever comes next, whether months or years or decades, I move forward with clarity about what I deserve, what I will accept, and what legacy I choose to leave behind. Not an inheritance distributed without regard to reciprocity, but a foundation built on genuine values. Not relationships maintained through obligation, but connections sustained through mutual respect and care. Cancer took much from me, but it gave me this: the courage to finally live according to my own worth, not others' expectations. And for that unexpected gift, I am strangely, paradoxically grateful. I closed the laptop, a sense of peace settling over me despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead. The journey wasn't over. Recovery would be long. Relationships would continue to evolve. Challenges would inevitably arise. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was moving forward on my own terms. My legacy aligned with my values, my boundaries clear and unapologetic. That alignment, that integrity between what I believed and how I lived, was worth more than any inheritance I could have left to those who saw me only as a resource. It was the true gift I'd finally learned to give myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.